Welcome to the Diplomatic Notes. The Diplomatic Notes channel interviews business leaders, political leaders, and other heads of institutions to discuss on the current developments in an international environment. Do watch and subscribe for more videos on current topics. Today, the guest with us is Dr. Karl Erik Norrman, Secretary General of the European Cultural Parliament, ex-Swedish ambassador, and currently a professor for politics and diplomacy. We're discussing on the topic of the EU's role in the current politics which are happening in the Balkan region, and in the Middle Eastern region. So it's a pleasure to have you, Dr. Norman. So today we are planning to discuss on this particular topic because we're planning to take this as two different areas of discussion. One of the areas of discussion is that we're noticing that there's a lot of kind of a very disturbed scenario that's erupt in the Middle Eastern region. That's one of the parts that I intended to discuss with you. The second part that I really wanted to discuss was also something which has been happening in the last few years and especially in the last few months, especially in the Balkan region, to specifically focus on Serbia and Kosovo. Yeah. So we can discuss on two parts of this, but then to begin with, one of the things that we didn't expect was the sudden disturbance which has once again come out in the Middle Eastern region. And there is one of the things which people are really worried about is where does the EU stand inside? Because now the world is going through a lot of polarization which is happening. It could be in the US, it could be in any part of the world which is happening. How do you see this?
Well, it's first of all, of course, very tragic, and it's confirming a tendency of extreme polarization in the world. Wherever you look around, you see polarized societies or polarized regions. So, of course, the Middle East has been a topic of conflict for a very long time. But now the Hamas terrorist attack on Israel has created a new situation, which is really terrible, where people are suffering now, mostly in Palestine, where the Israelis are hitting back. So this is indeed tragic, but it has a very long history. If you say the European perspective is, of course, that Europe has for 1,000 years been a region of conflict and wars and suffering. But after the Second World War, we succeeded in creating a common Europe and even a European Union where peace is self-evident. At the margin of the European Union, we have the war going on between Russia and Ukraine, but the European Union countries themselves, after thousands of years of wars, are in peace. So we really have some difficulties in understanding how can it be possible that there is so much hate, so little understanding, and there's such a polarization in the Middle East. Efforts have been done. As you can tell you that my very first ambassador, when I was a young diplomat, was a well-known representative of the Secretary General of the United Nations in order to try to find a solution between Israel and its neighbors. And he said, well, he tried and tried, but he said it's a hopeless task. And these are decades ago. Today, the task seems even more hopeless. Because you hear in interviews in the media, you hear Israelis say, I don't care if Palestinian children are dying. You hear Palestinians say, we don't care if Israeli children are dying. So this is the level we have reached now, and that is really terrible.
Now, how do you see this, especially because there is already ongoing war, especially in the European region? And it's not just in the European region. The turmoils were created in the nearby region, which could be inside Azerbaijan and Armenia, which was very recently. And now, once again, it's come as a very big challenge because the Middle Eastern countries all have united together. Now the EU is pushed into a critical position where they are forced to take sides. And especially in times where there's already disturbance in the region, how are they able to balance both of these and take sides, which is the most difficult thing? Because taking one side will also affect the other war which is happening around.
Yeah, well, it's not easy, of course. But the first self-evident reaction for the European Union is to say Israel was attacked by a terrorist organization, Hamas. We consider Hamas a terrorist organization, and they do not necessarily represent the people, the civilian people in Palestine, but it's a terrorist attack. So that has to be condemned. Israel has the right to defend itself. But then the other side of it is, of course, that we have to find ways to give humanitarian assistance to those who suffer in Palestine. And that balance has to be going on. The very first reaction was we had to withdraw the whole development assistance or humanitarian assistance to Palestine. That was taken back after 2 days. So it's quite clear that the humanitarian assistance will go on if it is logistically possible to get in them, because that it is also, as you know, the subject to a lot of the negotiations about where are people and moving people within Gaza and so on. There is one additional aspect which is completely forgotten in this conflict. The area of Israel plus Palestine is only about 28,000 square kilometers. And in the last 50 years, the number of Palestinians has been growing from 1 million to 5 million today in the last 50 years. And the Israeli population has been growing from 1960 until now from 2 million to over 9 million. So there's an enormous population pressure in this very, very limited geographical area, which of course makes the situation even worse. The bad thing is also that very, let's say, fundamentally religious people on both sides are seeing fertility and more children almost as a weapon. You know, you speak about a human shield against a bombardment and so on. But here is a human shield in double sense, because it's both that it is a reason for trying to protect yourself or having the others avoid bombing, but it's also a conscious method to say the more people we are, the more powerful we are. And that, I think, is a very disturbing element on top of all these others.
Since this is one of the things which, as you mentioned, if there is one thing that comes as a concern to me, who do you think so could be that third party who can come inside, who's a more trustable person to negotiate? Or do you think that, since you mentioned now in the beginning, that this was something that began before 50 years and still the negotiation could not continue ahead? Do you think that it can be solved, or is this distrust going to continue even in the long? And if I may just complete this, and will the United Nations be credible and trustable to both the parties?
The United Nations are not very strong today, and that mainly, of course, because there's the ongoing stalemate in the Security Council. But other parties will continue to try. Various EU politicians, including Ursula von der Leyen and the foreign responsible, Mr. Borrell, are trying. The Germans are trying, the French are trying, the British are trying. And But the good thing in the last few years has been that relations between Israel, diplomatic relations between Israel and some Arab countries have been established. So it looked like a kind of an opening there. Today, the Arab countries are probably uniting against Israel, but we have seen one other interesting example this year of almost surprising reconciliation between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And who was there the mediator? It was China. So China has, as you know, had no particular, let's say, ideological interest. They have business interest, goodwill interest, and perhaps superpower interest. And if they could play a role here, it might be even realistic, because the Europeans will be considered by the Palestinians as partial, because they would say the Europeans created Israel. So they created the problem, they will say. Well, we all know why the Europeans created Israel, which was after the Second World War. So, and the Americans are also very strongly liaised with Israel. Russia, of course, had their own problems and also perhaps a lack of credibility, although there is a very big new Russian immigration element in Israel, which have come in the last, let's say, 10 years or so. But I think, quite frankly, paradoxically, it seems, I think China is perhaps the most, the best possibility for, but I don't know if they want, if they wish to get into this.
I think since you mentioned China, I think one of the questions that comes to me is, where is it that the EU and the US, which had a very strong diplomatic role, have now been less influential as compared to China? Where did the change of time come inside, and where do you think the trust has built more towards China rather than what was held with the EU and the US?
Well, I wouldn't say trust, perhaps, but it is a power which is quite clear and evident, and they deliver. You can ask any African and say the Chinese are delivering. They have built the ports all the way around Africa. Airports, railways, highways, and they are now doing the enormous new Silk Way from China to Europe. So they deliver. If they could deliver politically in such a sensitive thing is another question, because it is very much a religious issue. If it is serious religion, or if religion is only here a kind of window dressing for power, it's hard to say. But we do experience, as a matter of fact, since around 1980, we see a very strong revival of the role of religion in the world. At around 1980, you had Khomeini. You had the Polish Pope, John Paul II, and you had the evangelicals in the United States, and all these powers really put religion back on the agenda, and that is used now very extremely. We almost don't remember anymore, but 3 weeks ago, Israel was completely polarized. Because between the, let's say, the liberal young people on one hand and the old-fashioned conservative extreme religious on the other hand. But with the war, they were united. They were united, just like the European Union was united when Russia attacked Ukraine. Europe was polarized, but was united when that came. So that is, these things are happening. But religion, in my view, plays a very negative role, and is one of the reasons behind the strong polarization around the world. And China doesn't care about that. And that is perhaps an advantage for them, but also perhaps a difficulty when it has to how do you navigate in this kind of climate.
Now, you're saying this because since you emphasized on China, if there is one last question that I would like to ask you about the role of China in this, do you still feel that China will take that confidence in treading the line, especially being a political issue which is there? Because when there is a business interest inside this, China has always stood far ahead in negotiating, bringing Saudi Arabia and Iran together.
Yeah.
And they've always stood across because they've seen across on as a very neutral figure, which is not interfering inside the political environment. Now, seeing this as a political issue, do you feel that China will definitely take a stand, or they would sleep away on this?
Well, I hesitate here really, because I think I agree that as soon as there is business interest there, and also it's a long-term raw material interest, etc., etc., no doubt China will go in. But here it's there may be the problems are bigger than the possibilities, so they might themselves hesitate,
Slip away.
and slip away rather than going in.
So China is one of the regions which we can speak about. The other regions also come down as India has a crucial role to play in this. At the same time, the Southeast Asia has a crucial role to play in this. Now, to consider this, definitely this particular war is going to trigger down a domino effect on the prices of the oil. And once the oil prices go higher, the inflation is going to be affected around the world. Considering these things, the European Union and the US is much more affected as compared to the Asian region. Now, how do you see this? Where do you see that Asia has to take a critical role here on the political sides as well, on the global political side? Or do you feel that they still are really more isolated from the global issues?
I was just going to say, when we talked about and when I mentioned my hesitance around China's role, I would say perhaps we need more in India as a possible mediator in this conflict, simply because of the traditional interest of Indian politicians and diplomats in international affairs, and also a certain sensitivity about tricky religious issues which India has entered itself. So that might be, as a matter of fact, I do not think, because Modi is a controversial person, so but perhaps some Indian politician could come here as could play a role if Europeans fail, Americans fail, and others fail. That is a possibility. We shouldn't exclude, of course, United Nations, the Secretary General is trying his best himself, but we probably have to wait and see.
I think moving towards this, and I have one interesting question that I want to ask you. One of the interesting questions is that today inside European Union, we have a lot of challenges which are there. One of the challenges to mention is the industries need to upgrade themselves into digitization. That's one of the most important things, because the UK is emphasizing, the EU is emphasizing. The second challenge that comes inside is the supply chain challenge, which is there, because when I mentioned the supply chain, especially with the Russian war happening, the energy crisis has triggered this. Now, with all these economic challenges which the European Union is facing, don't you think so that the right wing is going to grow? What is the reason that it's going to be us versus them? The polarization is going to grow more. And that is really going to affect down with more of the fragmentation is going to increase more inside European Union, where the political leaders and the state leaders will start questioning, should the EU remain, like, for example, Italy or France or including in the AFD, which is growing in Germany, the question that they would put across is, we want a Brexit, Deutschland exit out, or France exit, or Italy exit. Now, how do you see this?
When Brexit happened in 2016, many of us speculated that perhaps there would be other exits. But they didn't happen. Quite frankly, all statistics show, and Gallups and so on show, that the belief in the European Union is stronger now than it was before. We have conflicts, and each country has a polarization inside. We have, let's say, extremist parties growing. And we will see what happens next spring when there are elections for the European Union, for the European Parliament. But as you know, in all national elections, the big issue is migration. And that is what is feeding the right-wing parties, more than economic issues or normal, let's say, ideological issues. So the political, let's say, map is more difficult to read today, since the left and right issues are not so much relevant anymore. It's more these kind of cultural issues, the kind of clash of civilizations issues that we have a terrible situation in Sweden, for instance, right now, and you have in Germany also a growing alternative for Deutschland party, and in Italy a right-wing party is ruling. But I do not think that the European Union is falling apart. Polarization will be going on, and I think politicians have to be more aware about the social differences which are happening as a result of inflation and energy crisis, etc. Poor people getting poorer, rich people becoming very rich. So we are gaps now which are the worst since 100 years. And that is another thing, but that's also a global thing. You have that all over the place.
I think if there is something that I would like to ask you based on your experience, and since you're also a professor, do you think so that the whole issues of the world will be solved if the US and Russia and China talk together on a negotiating table with a strong sense of diplomacy, which was there in the 90s with the Reagan government and Gorbachev government as it began in the late 80s, which was there. So could that be one solution at this moment of time? What is your say based on your experience and knowledge of this industry?
That is probably the only solution, you're right. And that is, of course, very necessary. And because we know that there is at least one or two issues that are absolutely necessary, they have to be solved, and that's the climate issue. The climate issue can be solved only together through a very strong body, a united Security Council, for instance, of the United Nations. And we don't see that strong body today because we see only polarized bodies. So it's absolutely necessary to get them to the same table, and that somehow, in 1962, the Cuba crisis, the whole world was fearing a third world war, an atomic war. But it led to the powers coming together. It could be so again as a result of a desperate situation, and let's hope so.
I agree, because at that time they came forward. John F. Kennedy came forward, and the whole issue was sorted out. And the Russian side also mellowed down when they took it up indeed. So that's a very interesting thing. Now, this is another one side of the world that we are facing. The another side of the world that we're facing is one of the it's a very silent issue which has been happening. Because I remember I had one of my friends from Kosovo who said just one thing. What is the thing that Kosovo, and at the same time I had another one friend from Bosnia-Herzegovina. What they mentioned down was, what is it, the fault of us because of our country not being recognized around the world. And the issue is a very troubled issue. They're not able to emigrate, or they're not able to travel around the world. Now, Germany is the only country which is accepted down for their movement, if I'm right. So how do you see this, especially in the region of Kosovo? Because once again, the problems and the troubles have begun, especially with Serbia and the Kosovo aggression that has come inside. So how do you see this?
Yeah, that is another very polarized issue which does not seem, there is no development. You know, in 2008, Kosovo declared itself independent. And rather soon they had a little bit more than 100 recognitions from other governments. I think they are still at only 102 out of the 193 UN members. So the positions are locked. And Serbia is doing a lot of diplomacy in order to prevent other countries or governments from recognizing Kosovo. And at the same time, this is a little bit of a proxy conflict as well. Serbia has Russia behind themselves. It's the kind of the Slavic Orthodox Church community. And Kosovo does not only have the European Union and America to some extent behind it, but they very strongly have Turkey behind themselves. Turkey is a very strong supporter of Kosovo. So here and there's religious elements here as well. The Islamic ambitions of Turkey, for the Balkan. Long history, Ottoman Empire, being up to the doors of Vienna some 100 years ago. So this does not make things easier. This area of northern Kosovo is an area where both sides are making mistakes. The boycott of Serbs led to only 3% of the electorate up in northern municipality there participated. But based on these 3%, Kosovo established a mayor. And this, of course, is against all normal democratic principles and so on. And the Serbs, if directed directly from Belgrade or not, we don't know. Some militants went down and killed Kosovo police. So it's a conflict which is going on, and which is a proxy conflict. And the only thing we can do here is more hope, however, than between Israel and the Palestinians, because if somehow we can get these two parties to fulfill their obligations in terms of EU accession. There is a long list of 30 plus points about human rights, about rule of law, etc., etc. And when both parties have fulfilled them, just like North Macedonia is trying, like Montenegro is trying, and so on, and they can be accepted as member of the European Union, the conflict is more or less solved, because under the umbrella of the European Union, and that is what the European Union can be good for, to be an umbrella for conflicting parties. That means that could be the conflict would more or less disappear.
I think, if I may ask you one thing, because I know that you have been also been very passionate in the Yugoslavian region of politics. If I'm right, I think you have been traveling a lot in the region, the former Yugoslavian region and the current region which is there. You have had a lot of history of seeing the past and the present. Now, definitely, if you notice, the conflict could be solved or like brought to a close, but still the recognition which is needed for the people, where do you think so that this is falling in short? Because the recognition, when I mean, the country should be accepted and recognized to the world, and then comes inside the economic investments and then the political, geopolitical togetherness which should come inside integration. So where do you think so that this is lagging inside?
Well, I think in this case, it has to be otherwise. I think in this case, they both have to try to make their assignment as good as they can, and in that way become really strongly eligible and accepted by the European Union and becoming members. So here the European Union has an enormous role. If they get in there, then all these objections against the other side will fall, and the recognition will come. It will go rather quickly, I believe. Today, for instance, even Spain, because of their Catalan conflict, do not accept Kosovo as a, for all other reasons, they would have accepted them, but because of their own problems, they don't. But if they were to join the European Union, I think also these problems of recognition and possible investment going on. You shouldn't forget that the European Union is pumping in billions of euro in Western Balkan association phase of their relation to the European Union, and so they get substantial financial support already, and this is an investment, of course, of the European Union. Let's say an investment in peace, you might even call it.
At this moment, do you think the European Union has the leadership to take this ahead? Because Macron or Chancellor, the French President Macron, or Chancellor Germany, Olaf Scholz, now they both need to lead the decisions of the EU. Now, considering these very critical decisions, will they prioritize Kosovo at this point of time?
Well, that is a difficult question. They might not, because, of course, the headlines are rather in other areas than in West Balkan. But it's a process which is going on in Brussels, and I think if the after all, we had recently a meeting between EU leadership and the West Balkan in Tirana in Albania. And Albania, of course, is at Kosovo's side, they speak the same language, and so on. So something is going on, and quite frankly, these Western Balkan countries, including Serbia and Kosovo and all the others, are closer from a bureaucratic point of view, legal point of view, and so on, to the European Union than Ukraine is. But Ukraine is closer politically because of the special situation, because of the war. So it is difficult to say, but I think if the European leaders were to think in long-term long-term strategy, they would definitely give priority to this, because it would solve so many problems.
So if I have one last question, Ambassador, do you feel at some point of time the EU should take a leadership in bringing China Russia and the US and the Middle East together. Because the US is stronger in bringing everybody together, but it's not acceptable to many parties in world. But the EU is seen as a very neutral party to everybody. It could be with Russia, it could be with China, it could be with the US, and it could be with the Middle East. So do you feel at some point of time the EU has the potential to take this leadership, but then it's not putting the foot ahead and pushing the US ahead, and thereby it's creating more of the disturbances or like the more of a disintegration?
Well, theoretically, of course, the EU should do that because, after all, we are considered, I say we, Europeans are considered the soft power champions of the world, meaning that the strength is rather in diplomacy or these aspects rather than weapons or extreme economic strength. But it takes very good politicians to do this. We have a few good politicians perhaps in Europe, but we might not for the moment have strong enough politicians to take this role, I'm afraid. But it would be very desirable that the European Union took it because they are in a position geopolitically to take this role.
I think one of the things that you touched upon, and because of which the question prompted me, was your favorite thing. I think you have always been the advocate for soft power. At the same time, I've also heard you to share about smart power.
Yeah.
Now, what are those soft powers, do you think, that is needed at this point of time, if you feel theoretically that can blend these disintegrations? What are those soft powers that the world can emulate or the EU can advocate to bring inside the integration?
Well, the very essence of soft power is, of course, that I can make you trust me, although I represent something different from you. And that is somehow the Europeans, the strength that the Europeans have is, after all, now here in history, that they succeeded after the disastrous Second World War to build this European project, where Europeans are trusting each other, traveling across the borders, cooperating, and having a common feeling, sort of. And that is a strength which is rather unique in the world and in world history. And if that strength could be used, then that is, of course, would be fantastic.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to
My
talk
pleasure.
to you. And it's always nice to discuss with you on the fields of diplomacy, politics, and international relations. Thank you so much
Thank you
for
very
having
much.
me.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.